So, along with bias, it's important for us to remember and to learn and to understand privilege. And there are two kinds of bias. There's conscious bias, and that's bias that we are aware of and we intentionally exhibit. We are aware of and we intentionally exhibit. Okay? And then there's unconscious bias, and that's bias that impacts our thoughts without us realizing it. And often it's shaped by societal factors, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But so let's speak just really briefly to conscious bias. That could be a blatant demonstration or expression of somebody's beliefs. Okay, so maybe people openly talk about their dislike for a particular group of people. Okay, that would be like a conscious bias. The person that's speaking it knows it, and the other people around it know it too. They know how that person feels. And then unconscious bias, you don't really recognize it. It's automatic. There are all sorts of bias, unconscious bias, and sometimes conscious, I guess it could be after you thoroughly evaluate. But I'll take a minute to kind of highlight a few. So the first one is beauty bias, and that is where you are biased against people who you consider to be more attractive, right? And so you hold the people that are more attractive at a higher regard than the people that aren't as attractive to you. Affinity bias, that's when you feel like you have a shared connection with that person, and so you hold them to a higher regard. The halo effect is when somebody has done one good thing that impacts all of the other things they do. That puts all the other things they do in a more positive light because they've done that one really good thing. This could be demonstrated in students. Student does excellent on a paper, 100%. From the very beginning, then you're going to remember that 100% they received, and that's going to impact or could impact the way that you grade their future work, right? Because of that one really awesome job they did that one time. The opposite of that is the horns effect. Student does horrible on a paper right from the get-go. That's going to impact your perception and the way that you grade all of their other papers. Now, of course, as educators, we want to pretend and we want to believe that we do not do this. But like I said, some of this might be unconscious. And really what we have to just do is do our best not to do that. In talking to some teachers, what they will do before they grade, maybe cover up a paper or not pay attention, maybe you download. That's kind of hard to do when you're in the student's file and you're downloading from them. It's kind of hard not to know what student's paper you're grading. But there could potentially be ways that you try to eliminate that. And some of you have so many students that you don't remember what papers they've done, and that could kind of be a good thing in some cases, right? You can't remember the previous paper they wrote, maybe. Similarity bias, well, that's just where you're kind of like the affinity bias, where you're noticing similarities that you recognize in between two different things. The contrast effect is when you're comparing to others, okay? So that's like maybe where you're grading 20 stacks of tests or papers, and you subconsciously are comparing each paper to the next. So, you score this student with a 80%, you're on to the next paper, you're going to compare that next paper to the previous paper, and that's going to, essentially have an impact on your overall score, right? So it's constantly comparing and contrasting within the same group. Attribution bias, that's where we believe that good things happen to people based on luck rather than merit. And so, it's because they, come from a wealthy family that they're, able to do this. And so that's an attribution bias. Confirmation bias is we're going to look for evidence that back up our own personal beliefs. Okay, so If I'm interacting with a person and I have a belief that they should be a certain way, I'm going to look for evidence, and my brain will automatically try to find evidence to align my belief to, to match it, to make that person into who I think that they are, because I'm just going to be paying attention to what I want to pay attention to. Okay. And I think that's it. Oh, confirmation bias. I just realized confirmation bias is on there twice. That's silly. That's a mistake. Confirmation and conformity. Oh, I guess it's a little bit different. Oh, conformity bias is group and peer pressure. So that's like we want to conform to others. That's our bias. Okay, so this is kind of a good activity to do. It's a really quick, easy one. Read the words on the screen. Now try to flip-flop them. How does that feel? So instead of his and hers and his, female, male, nurses, doctors, right? So this is particularly surrounding gender, primarily, right? Gender bias. It's really hard for some of us to flip those two words around. And that's just because that's just the way it's been ingrained in our culture and in our society.